Growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, one of my favorite television shows was Candid Camera. How many of you remember Candid Camera? Raise your hand. Well, some of you remember it in syndication then, probably, rather than in reality. But the show's crew would orchestrate pranks that caught people off guard, and they would film their reactions, and it was usually a hilarious night of TV, and then when they would catch them off balance, they would finally say, smile, you're on Candid Camera. And one of the best episodes was they'd gone to a college campus, an esteemed university, and they had taken some of the brightest and most articulate and best students from that university, and they said, we have actually developed a new test for career placement, and there's a new series of tests, and we want to try it out on somebody, and so we want to make sure that you will get adequately placed in your career and what career you're most suited for, both by personality and ability and interest. And so they took them in, and they would show them in the interviews as they're giving them these tests and ask them questions. And the students because they were the only ones that were chosen, were the best and the brightest. And they all think they're heading for, political office or bank president or entrepreneur or head of a company. And then at the end of each and every one of them, they said, congratulations, the career you are best suited for is a shepherd. And they filmed those students' reactions. And then, of course, they would say, smile, you're on Candid Camera. Shepherd. Wow. Who in their right mind would ever want to be a shepherd? And what did it say about them for experts to think they should be a shepherd? Think about it. Who would want that job? Whether that was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago or presently, because there are still shepherds today. Who would want to live their whole life with smelly, stubborn, stupid sheep? Because that's what they are. They're smelly, they're stubborn, and they're stupid. And some of you are saying, I know some people like that. But anyway, the life of a shepherd, especially in the Middle East during the first century, was really tough. It was a rigorous work. The shepherd lived 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the sheep out in a field, because the sheep were in constant peril and the shepherd was always on watch. And see, it's interesting. Dogs are known for their loyalty and their affection. Oxen are known for their strength. Almost every animal is known for one thing or another. Cheetahs are known for their world-class speed. But a sheep is known for only one thing: stupidity. Serious stupidity. If one sheep walks off a cliff, it's very possible the other sheep will follow right along off the cliff. A lone, tiny rabbit can set off a stampede of sheep. And yet, in Isaiah chapter 40, Jesus is pictured as the Messiah who is going to be the shepherd of God's sheep. And he's not only pictured that way in the prophecy in Isaiah 700 years before the time of Christ, but he accepts that picture, he accepts that responsibility in detail, according to the Gospel of John in chapter 10. So here's another portrait of Jesus in the prophecies of Isaiah. Yes, the sovereign Lord is coming in power. He will rule with a powerful arm. See, he brings his reward with him as he comes. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. What an amazing thing to say about the becoming Messiah 700 years in advance. He's coming in power. But, in many ways, he's going to be like a shepherd, and he will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. The shepherd spent so much time in the fields with the sheep, fighting off predators, catering to the stubborn and stupid sheep, that some shepherds forgot how to be civilized. Historians tell us they were rugged, rough men. And you can imagine they would be. Men who, kind of like in the Old West, the founding of the Old West in the United States, or the exploring of the Old West, had developed some uncouth habits. So that when they finally returned to civilization, they stirred up trouble because they were wild and rowdy and mean and were loners. Just like cowboys in the Wild West were mostly loners. So were shepherds. They spent nearly their whole life with just sheep. And yet, in John chapter 10, Jesus twice calls himself the Good Shepherd. In other words, he loves the rugged work, but he does it with a soft and kind heart. That's the emphasis the prophet Isaiah gave him. So let's break down what Isaiah 40, compared to what Jesus said of himself in John chapter 10, say about the roots of the Messiah being a shepherd. He will feed his flock. He nourishes us with spiritual strength. I'm hoping that everybody in this room tonight has had that experience or felt that experience where the shepherd has fed you and nourished you and given you spiritual strength. It happens to me all the time. It often happens to me here, but it doesn't have to happen here. It can also happen at any area in my private life. I hope it happens with you, that you feel the feeding of the shepherd. And so Jesus, referring back to this prophecy in John chapter 10, says this. He explained it to them. I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. My purpose is to give my sheep a rich and satisfying life. Let's talk about Jesus being the gate there for just a minute that he said about himself. A familiar sight in the time of Jesus and today was a sheepfold. Almost every hill on the countryside in Palestine had sheepfolds, holding yards for sheep. The shepherd would bring in his flock at night to protect them from the elements and from predators. The sheepfold could be a cave. It could be made of mud or thorn bushes. Most often around it were piles of stone. But it could have been any of those things. And everybody in Palestine would have understood when Jesus was talking about, I am the shepherd and I am the gate, gate because the shepherd was the gate. The shepherd was the door. His body became the barricade. Once the sheep were tucked in at night, the shepherd would lay over the threshold and protect them, and someone would literally have to come through him to get to the sheep, or the sheep would have to go through him to wander away. And so when Jesus said, "I am the gate," he was saying, that's the relationship I, as the great shepherd, have with my sheep. I'm the protector. There's only one entrance into my kingdom, the sheepfold, and that's through me. But when you come through that entrance, I'm going to take care of you and protect you like a mother does her young. Isaiah 40 says. When you come in, I'm going to take personal responsibility for you. I am the gate. Remember, verse 10 there said, I'm the gate, but Satan's goal for you is disaster. He wants to be the thief that sneaks in and kills and destroys the sheep. My purpose for my sheep is to give them a rich, satisfying life. Listen, never forget this is Satan's desire for you. The thief's desire is to break in and kill, to break in the sheepfold and destroy you. The good shepherd's desire is to protect you from that and to give you a rich and satisfying life. Whenever the thief can tempt you to wander away from God's will or God's flock, whatever he can do to do that, he will do it, and he will destroy you. On the other hand, Jesus promises to give you the opposite, to give you a rich and satisfying life. But Jesus doesn't just feed his flock, according to the text. He also carries the sheep. I tell you the truth, anyone in the first verse of John 10, I tell you the truth, anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must be a thief and a robber. The shepherd knows us by name, draws us together if we stray, is quick to bring us home. Do you remember the parable, the trilogy of parables that Jesus told in Luke chapter 15? He told about a lost coin, a lost son, we call him the prodigal son, and a lost sheep. And the lost sheep had 100 sheep in Jesus' parable, and 99 were in the sheepfold, and one had successfully wandered away. And in Jesus' trilogy of parables, he said, the shepherd went to get the one to rescue and bring him back. That's what he wants to do with us as well. Now, in ancient Israel, often multiple flocks and shepherds used the same sheepfold at night. They stayed together at night. One of the shepherds would lay his body over the entrance to the floor. Often then they would switch positions, just like guards, military guards do. And they would switch positions and care for the flock. And only a thief, as John 10 says, would try to scale the wall or breach the fold some other way. A shepherd would go to the door. And when he was at the door or the gate, the sheep would recognize him visually and certainly audibly, because the shepherd had a relationship with each of his sheep. They spent their days together. They were with each other year after year. A shepherd knew his sheep personally. To the shepherd, the sheep were like pets. He treated them the way you might treat a beloved dog or a beloved cat. He cared for them that much. John 10:14, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me. In verse 3 it says, He calls his sheep by name and leads them out, and they recognize his voice and come to him. A shepherd had to know his sheep. Sheep knew their shepherd. And so I find it interesting that in the New Testament, one of the terms that applies to the position or the office, and we, for some reason, and most people in churches, only call these men elders. And I make a point of it, particularly at the invitational Sunday morning, I make a point of it to say one of our shepherds will come. But the same word is used interchangeably in the New Testament to describe the same office, whether it's elder, shepherd, bishop, overseer. They're really the same word describing the pastor. They're really the same word describing the same office. And so I find it interesting that in the New Testament church, the people who are to be the leaders are called shepherds, because a shepherd has to know their sheep. They have to understand their sheep. They have to have a relationship with their sheep. Jesus, as our great shepherd, the good shepherd, knew that sheep are prone to wander, that sheep struggle, that sheep have a stubborn streak. That one in the back can get prideful. That one over in the teen section struggles with lust. That one sitting on the right side, about halfway back, has a problem with anger. The shepherd knows his sheep, their strengths, their weaknesses, loves them anyway, protects them anyway, and uses his knowledge of the sheep and how he leads them and where he leads them. And he's able to call them by name and lead them out. He's able to say things like, that one that is always wanting to act and always acts like an actress, that must be Julia Roberts over there in that sheepfold. That one who's always singing, thinks she's really a singer and likes to sing How Great Thou Art. That one's name is Carrie Underwood, that sheep. Some people will name your animals, you do. Leslie Fyoke here, Dr. Fyoke's wife, has a farm, and she names every one of her animals, every one of them. That one that's always trying to crack a joke. It's always seeming to be funny. That's Jeff Foxworthy over there. And those of you who don't know Jeff Foxworthy is, I just feel so sorry for you. And that one over there, that group of them that's always trying to sing in harmony, and that's U2. EWE2. And you, like a U as a lamb, you. Got it? And that one that wears the bandana and has the Uzi in his hand, that's Lambo. That's Lambo. That's bad, isn't it? If you want to, you can boo. Or you can say, bah. And I'll understand. I won't mind. But my point is, the shepherd knew his sheep. And the sheep knew the shepherd. And that's what creates the relationship. And Jesus is that kind of shepherd. We're told in verse 3 and 4, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And after he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know, oh, there's so much there. There's so much there. He doesn't walk behind them and drive them with a weapon or even with a prod. He walks ahead of them and leads them. And they follow because they know he has their best interest in mind. They know he loves them and wants to protect them. And the point is, that's who Jesus is as our shepherd. And the point is, that's the term in the New Testament that elders or overseers or pastors or bishops were also called shepherds. And there's a personal relationship. I had to call my bank recently. And it was an ordeal. Have you had to do that lately? Something like a bank or a pharmacy or something? I had to, first of all, they said, you haven't talked to us in a few weeks, and so you have to sign in with a personal PIN number. And then we have to text it to your phone, and then you have to get it and go to this place and type in that number and this and that and all of this. And I'd already given my name and my address and my account number and my phone number and now a PIN number. And I almost wasn't a Christian, wanting to yell at the machine. I don't want to be a number. I want to be a person that somebody cares about. And the text says that the shepherd cares about us so much that he holds us closely to his heart. That's what Isaiah 40 verse 11 says. He cradles us in his arms and holds us close to his heart. And Jesus then, talking about Isaiah 40 and the prophecy about him, said in John 10, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. A hired hand will run when he sees a wolf coming. He will abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him and he isn't their shepherd. And so the wolf attacks them and scatters the flock. The hired hand runs away because he's only working for the money. It's not his investment. And he doesn't really care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me. You see, sheep face all types of potentially lethal enemies, wild animals in treacherous territory and desperate thieves and their own stupidity. And so a good shepherd counted the cost and was even willing, he said, to sacrifice his life for the sheep. Wow. There was a tourist who was visiting a few years ago, a Syrian shepherd, and he noticed how the man was lying in front of the gate of the sheepfold just as they would have been doing 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And after gathering his sheep, he laid over the opening, and the shepherd told the tourist, I'm the door. Nobody gets in or out unless they go over me. You've heard the phrase, over my dead body. That's kind of the way the shepherd felt about his sheep. On a nightly basis, he was willing to lay down his life and sacrifice his life, Jesus said, to protect his sheep. He alone is all that stood between the sheep and danger. See a parallel there? He alone is all that stands between the sheep. I am a sheep, and the Lord is my shepherd, constantly watching my soul. We just sang. Jesus isn't a hireling or a hired hand like he talked about. Hireling doesn't care about the sheep. He's working for a paycheck. Hireling doesn't love the sheep. They belong to somebody else. They're not his investment. They're not his sheep. He ain't going to risk his life for the sheep. The Bible says Jesus spilt his blood to purchase the flock, to purchase the sheep. Don't you think he'll do everything he has to do to protect his investment? I think it's hard to lose your salvation. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's hard because he wants so desperately to save you. You know, I guess everybody in the world has seen the poem Footprints in the Sand. Leona Lewis sang a song about it as well. A man's journey through life is compared to a walk on the beach, and in his wake are seen two pair of footprints, and he and Jesus are walking side by side, you know. And then there's a stretch where only one set of prints are visible. And the man asked the Lord, "Where did you go? That was the time when I needed you the most." And the Lord said, "That's when I was carrying you." When I think about that poem or that song, I think about these texts where it says he carries us and he holds us close to his heart. It's an old story about a medieval knight who went to the Middle East on one of the Crusades. And he was captured in battle and brought to a Muslim sultan, Saladin. And the knight pleaded for his life. He told Saladin about his wife and children back at home, and he said, "They won't be able to make it without me. Please, I beg you, spare my life." Saladin said, "They'll forget about you the minute you're gone. They'll move on. People always move on." He said, "Not them. Trust me. I know the love of my wife and my children." And Saladin said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm willing to put that to the test. Let's send a message to your wife. Tell her that if she will cut off her right hand and send it back to me as an offering, as a sacrifice, I will release you." Within a couple of weeks, Saladin had a right hand in his possession that had been recently cut off and shipped to him. Today, there's a church in England with a statue of a woman who gave her hand for a man she loved. Yet Jesus sacrificed far more for his sheep than that. He didn't just give up a hand. He gave up everything. Everything. And he said in John chapter 10, the good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. You know why that would have been particularly meaningful to those people to whom he was speaking? Because they understood it. They understood the Old Testament system was a sacrificial system, that it was the sheep in the Old Testament who died for the shepherd, not reversed. It was the sheep who were placed on the altar. It was the sheep who were offered in the Old Testament sacrificial system for the sins of the shepherd. That's what makes this unbelievable. A Messiah like no other, a religion like no other, because the shepherd sacrificed for the sheep. But not only does Jesus feed and gather and carry his sheep, but he also leads his flock. Isaiah 40 tells us he'll gently lead those who are young, like a mother leads her lambs. And then Jesus, again referring back to that passage in John 10, says, after he's gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them. And they follow him because they know his voice. Now see, this is important because, as I told you a few minutes ago, often shepherds shared the same sheepfold at night. And so the shepherd gathered his own flock. There had to be a separation. Let's say, for the sake of argument tonight, that there were 3 or 4 shepherds who were sharing the same sheepfold at night. You couldn't get the sheep mixed up. You couldn't do that. In the morning, the shepherd, not some stranger, leads his sheep from the fold, and his sheep are familiar with his voice, the text says, and they follow. Very important. They hear his voice and go with their shepherd. True story from World War I about a battalion of Turkish soldiers who tried to steal a flock of sheep from a pasture just outside the city of Jerusalem. And the shepherd had dozed off and didn't realize what was happening. And the Turkish soldiers had the sheep near a hill, almost away from him. And when he awoke, he ran to the edge of the cliff, and he saw his flock being led away, and he knew there was no way he could fight the soldiers single-handedly, and they were already well ahead of him. So he cupped his hand around his mouth and shouted out his one particular and peculiar call, and the sheep stopped and listened and then turned around, and the whole herd rushed back toward their shepherd. And there was nothing the Turkish soldiers could do about it. If they killed them, they lost their investment. There was nothing they could do. The sheep had been saved because they knew their shepherd and the sound of his voice. Sheep follow a shepherd because they know him and they love him and they know he has their best interest at heart. And this is what frustrates me about so many people who claim to be Christians. I would never judge anybody, but so many people who claim to be Christians. They expect the Lord to protect them and care for them and lead them, but they have done nothing to familiarize themselves with their shepherd. They don't even spend a minute a day with him in prayer. They don't read his word. They don't come and worship him every Sunday, commune around the Lord's table to remember his sacrifice for them. For all practical purposes, he really is nothing but a stranger to them. And then they expect him to do all these other things. We get in trouble, or suddenly something bad happens, and then we reach out for the shepherd. And I guess that's better than nothing, but how much better to have had that relationship with the shepherd in the first place? You see, divine guidance is no secret. It's not some spiritual hocus pocus. There's nothing that separates spiritual people from people who are unspiritual or less spiritual. God doesn't communicate through some kind of series of mystic vibrations or supernatural sound waves that only the super sensitive, ultra spiritual person can pick up on. It's really as simple as this. The sheep know the shepherd and trust him. And the shepherd knows the sheep and protects them. Guidance comes out of intimacy. Guidance comes out of familiarity. You know the shepherd. And one characteristic that this text says, as you learn about the good shepherd, is that he never drives his sheep. You hear about a cattle drive, you never hear about a sheep drive, do you? You can drive cattle, but you have to lead sheep. Jesus says in verse 4, after he's gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them and they follow him. They follow his lead because they know his voice. He doesn't drive the sheep. He leads them by still waters into a good pasture where he can feed them and care for them. Or, as we've all known for so long, so would you read aloud with me Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. Wow. Is your shepherd the good shepherd? Is your shepherd the Messiah shepherd? What a beauty.